Okay, there's a story in Parshas Beshalach right after the Jewish people crossed through the Red Sea. The Torah tells us, "Vayasa Moshe Yisrael miyam suf." They leave the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, led by Moshe. Vayetze'u midbar shur. They go out to the Shur desert. Vayelechu shaloshes yamim b'midbar v'lo matzu umayim. They travel for 3 days in the desert and find no water. That's pretty bad. And then the Torah says in Pasuk Chav Gimel, Vayavo'u Marasa. They come to a place called Marah. V'lo yachlu lishtos mayim imara ki marim heim. They can't drink the water that they find in Marah because it's bitter. Al kain kara shema Marah. And that's why it became known as Marah, the place. And then the Torah says, Vayilonu ha'amal Moshe limor ma nishta. So they complain to Moshe. What are we supposed to drink? Vayitzak el Hashem. Moshe cries out to Hashem. Vayoreyu Hashem eitz. God instructed him. You see that tree over there? Take that tree. Our sages tell us that it was an olive tree. Take a branch from that olive tree and throw it into the water. So the Torah says, Vayashlech el hamayim vayimteku hamayim. Moshe threw it into the water, and miraculously the water became sweet. And therefore the Jews were able to drink. Sham samlo choku mishpat v'sham nisahu. And that is where God placed for the Jewish people a statute and a law, and that is where he tested the nation. Now I can certainly understand the idea of this being a test. God tests the Jewish people through their sojourn in the desert constantly. So by causing them to travel for 3 days without water and seeing what their reaction is going to be, which isn't really that nice of a reaction. I mean, after all, they're kvetching. This is basically the first kvetch of the Jews during their 40-year sojourn. It's not so nice, but Hashem, you see that Hashem doesn't get upset because these are infants in the sense, spiritually they're in their infancy. And so, okay, we have to be understanding, but it's a test for them to understand this is what God's all about. Sometimes he will take away water for 3 days, but eventually all will be well. Vayomer, and therefore Hashem says, Im Shemot tishma l'kol Hashem Elokecha. If you listen to Hashem and you do that which is upright in his eyes, and you listen to his mitzvos and you observe all of his commandments, then kol hamachala asher samti v'mitzrayim lo asim alecha ki ani Hashem rofecha. Then all of the ailments or illnesses that I placed upon Egypt, I will never place upon you because I am the Lord who heals you. And there's a lot to talk about of the idea of this portrayal of God as the doctor. We've talked about this in the Kuzari before, where Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has always portrayed Hashem as the doctor who has the medicine at the clinic, right? We've talked about this a lot. But and Hashem gives us mitzvahs that keep our lives healthy in a spiritual way. But if you notice, this idea that God not only tests the Jews, at the end of Pasuk Chafei says, Sham samlo choku mishpat, that God placed down for the Jewish people the law and the statute. What is choku mishpat doing over here? What does it mean that God placed down for the Jewish people laws and statutes at this place? What laws and statutes did he put into place? It doesn't seem like there was anything that God instituted. The simple understanding is that God was, choku mishpat is a reference to the theological ways of God. That sometimes the Jewish people were taught about how God functions. God functions in very mysterious ways, and sometimes he reveals to us what those mysterious ways are. Sometimes I need to let you travel for 3 days and get very, very thirsty before I'm there to provide deliverance for you. So that could be what choku mishpat means. But Rashi, actually quoting our sages, takes this much more literally. If you take a look at Rashi in source number 2, Sham Samlo, Bimara Natan Lahem Miktzat Parshiot Shel Torah Sheyitasku Bahem. That this was the first place that God gave the Jewish people a very small set of mitzvot, sort of a forspice for the giving of the Torah that they would experience in 7 weeks from this point, or 6 weeks from this point. The Jewish people were not going to get to Har Sinai for over a month. But God wanted to give them a small subset of mitzvot, and he gave them to the Jewish people at this place. Shabbos, Upara Aduma, Vidinin. That God gave a sort of a cross section of all different kinds of mitzvahs of the Torah. Chok and Mishpat. Chok means laws that are not so intelligible, like the Para Aduma. Mishpat are civil laws that as far as how to conduct Jewish civil society. Those were given at Mara, and also the laws of Shabbos as well. As we'll see from the law that, the Parsha of Man comes right after this in the Torah, where the Jewish people get the Man, and they're taught how to observe the Shabbat. So this is what Rashi tells us is really what the Torah is alluding to. Now it's very, very curious because there's a lot of imagery in this beautiful story. There's the imagery of the water that is bitter. There's the imagery of the olive wood, which also is bitter. And our sages therefore tell us that this is a nes b'toch nes. This was a miracle inside a miracle, or a miracle compounded with another miracle. Because normally when you want to sweeten something, you add sugar. You don't add something bitter. But here, in order to sweeten the water, Hashem instructed Moshe to take something bitter to sweeten the water, because olive wood is by its nature bitter. And miraculously, taking something bitter and putting it inside something else that's bitter results in something sweet. So what is the import of this story? What was the whole purpose of this lesson? What kind of education was Hashem providing? Now, it's very interesting that our sages tell us that the imagery of the wood is not by coincidence. If you look at the Medrash and the Mechilta, in source number 3, it says there's a discussion among the various rabbis. What kind of wood was this? So one rabbi says it was a willow branch, and another rabbi says a very, very bitter type of wood, even more bitter than olive wood. And some say that it was from a fig, some say it was from a pomegranate. But then the Medrash tells us, Dorshe Reshumos Omrin, that those who go into a deeper explanation say that Horehu Divrei Torah Shemeshulin BAYT, that actually God instructed Moshe with words of Torah that are compared to a piece of wood, are compared to a tree. Shenemar Eitz Chayim Hi Lamachazikim Ba. The Torah is a tree of life for those who hold on to it. That's a pasuk from Proverbs, from Mishlei. You should be sure you're familiar with it because it's from the davening, right? And so the imagery that our Chazal are portraying with the wood is that the wood represents the Torah. And by putting the Torah in the water, the water becomes sweet. So I still have a couple of questions. Why is Torah called bitter wood? Isn't Torah something sweet? And also, what is the imagery of the water? I mean, isn't Torah also compared to water? Take a look at the quote from the Gemara in Masechet Tainit. The Gemara says in source number 4, Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Idi, Lama nimshalu divrei Torah lamayim. Why are words of Torah compared to water? Dichsiv hoi kol tzamei lechu lamayim. That behold, all who are thirsty, let them go to water. And there the prophet Yeshayahu was not referring to water literally. He was talking to the quest for knowledge, the quest for Torah knowledge. So Lomar Lecha, and the reason why Torah is compared to water is Ma mayim anichim makom gavo v'olchim l'makom namoch af divrei Torah ein mitkayemin el b'mishadato shefela. That just like water is fluid and therefore is very affected by the laws of gravity. If you have water in a high place and it's on a slope, the water will slope downwards towards the lower place. So too, the words of Torah will always find themselves in someone who is at a lower place mentally, psychologically. If you make yourself lowly, the Torah will penetrate. If you place yourself very high, meaning that you're arrogant, then the Torah will not penetrate. That's why Torah is compared to water. So the basic question that I'm presenting to you is, you've got bitter water, you've got bitter wood, wood is compared to Torah, water is compared to Torah, you're putting the wood inside the water and it becomes sweet. What is the message if this is all really a metaphor for Torah? And the question is, why is it that sometimes Torah is compared to wood and other times Torah is compared to water? I think that there is a basic difference between the two. I think that water represents the fluidity of thought, of Torah study, of the things that you internalize into your mind and can flow intellectually into your mind and into your heart. So when we say that Torah is compared to water, we mean the world of ideas, of Torah study, the intellectual Torah. When we talk about Torah being compared to wood or to a tree is solid. A tree bears fruits. A tree is something that's tangible and hard. That's the part of the Torah which has to do with performance of the mitzvot. When you do the mitzvos of the Torah, you are bearing fruit just like a tree bears fruit. And so therefore, the two components of the Torah are complementary to each other. You have the intellectual pursuit of Torah study, and you have the physical pursuit of Torah fulfillment, of the performance of the mitzvahs. And I think what this story, the Jews travel 3 days without finding water, what it's basically saying is that when you travel for long periods of time without studying Torah, you become spiritually cranky. It's almost like being sleep deprived. If you're Torah deprived for 3 days, it's much more difficult to become spiritually attuned to the world around you. Because the Torah helps anchor us into a spiritual realm, a spiritual dimension. And without that Torah study, without the regular habitual Torah study, we become disconnected from looking at the world from a spiritual lens. And that's why the Jewish people start complaining after 3 days of no water, of no Torah study. By the way, this passage is the source text that teaches us the law that you're supposed to have. You can never go 3 days without a public Torah reading. Did you know that? There is such a law that the rabbis made a special rule that the Torah has to be read over the course of the week such that you don't have 3 days without Torah reading. So you have it on Shabbos, you have it on Monday, and you have it on Thursday. So there can never be 3 days without Torah reading. For this very reason, you can't go 3 days without Torah. But what about the observance of Torah? And this is where I think it's very important. If you try to disconnect, to uncouple Torah study from Torah observance in any way, then invariably the two of them will be bitter. And this is part of the mistake that I think sometimes our schools, our yeshivas and schools have made with our children, is that if a school overemphasizes the educational component of making sure that our students learn, without doing the practicums, without taking the students and having them actually practice Jewish law, right, on a very, very practical basis, by taking them out to feed the homeless, and by having them make a pair of tzitzis, or make a pair of tefillin, or to actually learn what a loom is, so that they understand what the laws of Shabbos are, that they don't have that very, very tangible connection to mitzvah observance. So then purely the intellectual study of Torah, without it being connected and anchored to the physical observance of the mitzvahs, can, for many students, not all, but for many of them, can be an embitterment of Torah. Similarly, and by the same token, if you only teach children how to do what they're supposed to do, without explaining to them why they're supposed to do it, you present them with the what. This is the what, and the how, but not the why. You just tell them this is what you're supposed to do without explaining them to the deeper meaning, the water of Torah. So then that could also disenfranchise people and embitter the tree of Torah, the observance of Torah. What is necessary, what needs to happen, is that you take both the intellectual richness of the Torah and the very, very rich practices of the Torah, and you combine them together. And therefore something paradoxical happens. Whereas if you try to uncouple them, the water of Torah is bitter and the tree of Torah is bitter, but when you put them together and you explain to the student, this is what the laws of Shabbos require of us, but understand what a malacha is, and understand what Hashem did when He created the world and why He rested, and why we are supposed to emulate Hashem in the process by desisting from malacha and give them a larger picture. And the intellectual and the philosophical, the water of the Torah, when you combine the water and the wood together, then all of a sudden, miraculously, the Torah, both components of the Torah become sweet. And this is something that, unfortunately, we neglect to do. Like it goes back to that analogy of the fitted sheet. If we overemphasize the philosophical speculation and the intellectual exercises of Torah study at the expense of practice, or if we overemphasize the minutia of practice at the expense of the larger picture of the philosophical speculation of what Torah is all about, and the beautiful universe that Hashem created, and so forth, so then the water and the wood can become bitter. If we put them together, the water becomes sweet. And so we have to try and create as even of a balance as we possibly can, so that ultimately, both for ourselves and for our children and our grandchildren, the Torah in all of its forms will always be sweet. Have a great day, everybody.